right, you can begin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Haley Ramuta, and with me today are my group members, Nuria Khan and Tiffany Brown. Together, we'll be presenting Chapter 15, Leading Change, from the Leadership Experience by Richard DAFT. Sorry, just now, I just having some technical difficulties trying to. Sorry about that. Okay, so firstly, I would like to start off by giving a brief overview of Chapter 15, Leading Change. So the chapter first discusses that organizations must change or perish, and effective leadership is key to guiding transformation. Next, it discusses Cutter's eight-stage model, which outlines steps for creating urgency, building vision, empowering employees, and sustaining change. Next, it discusses that leaders can drive progress through everyday change strategies like communication, creativity, and alliance building. Next, it talks about how successful leaders promote innovation, manage resistance with empathy, and handle change challenges like downsizing compassionately. Now that we've gotten a quick overview of what Chapter 15 focuses on, let's take a closer look at the introduction, where we really see the main message and purpose of this chapter, which is all about the importance of change in leadership. Chapter 15, titled Leading Change, focuses on one powerful message that in today's fast changing world, organizations must change or risk being left behind. This chapter forms part of The Leader as Social Architect, which brings together earlier ideas like creating a vision from Chapter 13 and shaping culture and values from Chapter 14. Together, these ideas show how leaders can build a strong social foundation that guides their organization toward lasting success. It
Yeah,
also it also helps readers understand the major social and economic pressures that make change necessary, and more importantly, how to lead both large transformations and smaller everyday improvements effectively. The chapter also emphasizes that a true change leader is not someone who simply maintains stability, but someone who actively drives progress, showing courage, adaptability, and confidence even in times of uncertainty. Most importantly, change leaders believe in their people's potential. They trust followers to take responsibility, learn from mistakes, and grow through the process of change. So now that we have a general idea of what Chapter 15 focuses on, let's look at some of the main key concepts relating to change. So the first concept that we will look at is change leaders and a new paradigm. Next, we'll talk about the eight-stage model of planned change. After that, we will discuss the two phases of change, creativity and innovation, then implementation and emotional engagement, and lastly, change strategies. Now, I'll just give a brief explanation of these key concepts. So, the first concept that we'll be looking at is change leaders and the new paradigm. This concept establishes the fundamental mindset necessary for survival today. A change leader is not defined by their willingness to promote change, not just maintain stability. This necessity stems from the new reality or paradigm shift, which mandates a transition from an old focus on stability and control to a new focus on change, crisis management, empowerment, and adaptability. Change leaders must be skilled at managing complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity, and using a vision to guide their teams. The second thing we'll discuss is the eight-stage model of planned change. This is the primary structural blueprint for executing major strategic transformations. It stresses that systematic attention must be paid to sequential stages to avoid failure. Key principles embedded in the model is essential for success, and they include establishing urgency, creating a strong guiding coalition, relentless communication, which is up to 10 times more than expected, empowerment, like removing structural obstacles to action, and successfully institutionalizing the change within the culture. Next, we'll look at the two phases of change and downsizing. This concept focuses on the severe human cost of necessary organizational change, particularly downsizing. Downsizing creates trauma not only for those displaced, but also for the remaining survivors, leading to reduced commitment and stress. Leaders have a moral responsibility to manage this humanely, demonstrating compassion and addressing the emotional needs of those who remain to maintain productivity and trust. Next, we'll look at creativity and innovation. Change requires generating and implementing new ideas. Creativity is the process of generating ideas that are novel and useful for organizational effectiveness. Innovation requires leaders to support the environment through idea champions. And these are people who passionately believe in an idea and fight to overcome resistance, as change does not happen by itself. And leaders, they must promote a culture that welcomes risk taking and uses methods like brainstorming with no criticism and freewheeling. Next, we'll look at implementation and emotional engagement. Overcoming the natural resistance to change requires mobilization beyond rational logic. Effective leaders use implementation tools that appeal to people's hearts as well as their minds, utilizing emotional elements like storytelling, humor, and a personal touch to persuade and influence followers. Providing training is also a crucial tool to ensure employees gain the necessary skills for new responsibilities. And lastly, we'll discuss change strategies. These are incremental, sometimes non conspicuous strategies used daily to continuously nudge the organization toward a desired future when grand efforts are constrained. These actions have a powerful cumulative effect. Specific techniques include creative self expression, like privately modeling new values, using the right words, turning opposition into opportunities, and actively pursuing alliance building, which is like treating opposition as potential allies. So, now that we've covered the main ideas and what the chapter emphasizes, let's go into one of the biggest takeaways: why change is so necessary in today's world. Now, this chapter and the related sources really highlight one central idea: that in today's fast paced, unpredictable world, organizations must either change or perish. It basically means that if companies don't adapt and evolve, they'll eventually fall behind or fail. So let's break that down a bit. The need for change is driven by how fast everything around us is shifting, like technology, globalization, and even social and political changes. The book explains that the world is now going through a transformation as massive as the Industrial Revolution, and leaders can't rely on old ways of doing things anymore. So, the old paradigm of management used to be all about stability, control, and keeping things running smoothly. But today, that just doesn't work because stability is really a myth. The environment is too complex and too unpredictable. The book even says, when things do not change, they die. And former CEO Jack Welch put it perfectly: when the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is in sight. So, if the world is changing faster than the organization is, it's only a matter of time before it collapses. The key takeaway here is that the main reason organizations fail to adapt is because they lack effective change leadership. In other words, it's not just the change itself that's hard, it's the leadership behind it that determines whether the organization survives or not. So, let me ask you all this. Why do you think the traditional management focus on stability and control is no longer enough for organizations to survive today? Okay, well, I would say that because the world around us doesn't stay stable anymore, the environment is constantly changing. So if leaders just try to maintain control, they'll fall behind. And the main consequence is that organizations that don't evolve eventually die out. And that's why change leadership has become such an essential skill. So now that we understand why change is necessary, let's look at what it truly means to be a change leader. Unlike traditional managers who focus on stability and short term goals, change leaders focus on transformation and the long term vision of where the organization needs to go. They operate under what the chapter calls the new paradigm, where leaders is about influence, empowerment, and collaboration rather than control. Change leaders aren't afraid of uncertainty, they actually embrace it and use it as an opportunity to innovate and grow. So that brings me to my second question. So what do you think are some key qualities that define a strong change leader compared to a manager who just focuses on maintaining the status quo? Okay, so I would say that they are proactive instead of reactive, and they focus on people and they lead with vision and courage instead of just enforcing rules. So now that we've talked about what defines a change leader, let's look at how leaders actually guide organizations through transformation. This section it focuses on how organizations can take the theory of change and turn it into real action. It explains the major stages of transformation and shows how even small everyday actions can make a big difference in promoting change. So, major change always begins with stage one, which is creating a sense of urgency. And a great example of this is the Volkswagen, which faced a serious internal crisis because of weak sales, high costs, and executive misconduct. Instead of trying to hide it, leaders at Volkswagen used that crisis as motivation. They made it clear to employees that the company had to change in order to survive. That's what we mean by thawing resistance to change. When people realize the stakes are high, they become more open and willing to act. And once urgency is established, leaders they move to stage two, which is building a powerful coalition. Then stage three, which is developing a vision and strategy. And after that, stage four, which is communicating the vision. The CEO of Yellow Fried System did this really well. He decided to transform the company from a simple trucking business into a customer service focused one. He kept saying that repetition is important, and he truly lived by that, traveling constantly to meet employees and repeat the message until it stuck. The goal was to change not just what people did, but how they thought about the company and their role in it. Then comes stage five, which is empowering employees by removing obstacles. At Yellow Fright, this meant giving frontline workers access to new information technology so they could solve customer problems immediately without waiting for a manager's approval. This showed a huge shift from a traditional top down structure where everything had to go through supervisors to a more empowered system where employees were trusted to make quick, independent decisions that aligned with the company's vision. After that, stage six focuses on achieving short term wins to keep people motivated. And stage seven is about maintaining the momentum. And stage eight ensures that the new way of operating becomes part of the organization's culture. But not all change has to be massive. The chapter also shows how everyday strategies can make a difference. For instance, one sales executive used the right words to reframe a meeting and publicly support a female marketing director's overlooked idea, helping to shift the team's culture and confidence. Another example is creative self expression, where a leader quietly models new values, like choosing family balance over working late hours, to show others that it's okay to prioritize well being. And small actions like these can create a ripple effect that promotes long term positive change. So, with that being said, the first question that I have is, why do you think that the first stage, creating a sense of urgency, is so critical to leading successful change? Okay, well, I would say that because people don't naturally like change, they need to feel the urgency and understand what's at stake before they'll be willing to move forward. That's why effective leaders communicate in ways that make the need for change real and hard to ignore. And the second question that I also have is that the CEO of Yellow Fried said that repetition is important. Why do leaders need to repeat the vision so often? Okay, because people don't automatically understand or believe in a new direction the first time they hear it. And change, it takes repetition and consistency. So the CEO knew that if he kept repeating the message, both in words and actions, it would eventually shape how employees thought about their work. And that brings me to the end of my section. Now I'll pass you along to Tiffany Brown, who will be doing the two faces of change.
Next part of the chapter focuses on a really interesting and realistic idea, the two phases of change. It basically explains that while change is often necessary for organizations to grow and survive, it also comes with challenges that can deeply affect people. So, every change has two sides, one exciting and positive, and the other painful and stressful. Let's start with the first phase, the positive or exhilarating side of change. This is the side leaders usually focus on when they introduce change. They see it as a chance to strengthen the organization through innovation, creativity, and adaptation. For example, a leader driving a massive IT transformation, maybe worth around $1 billion, might focus on the big picture benefits, like cutting costs and increasing sales. To them, change feels energizing, full of possibility, and essential for keeping the company competitive. So, from the leader's perspective, change can be exciting and even fun because it's about improvement, progress, and long term success. But then there's a second phase of change, which is a painful or negative side. This is a side employees often experience, and it's just as real. Change can be uncomfortable, stressful, and even frightening. Workers may have to quickly learn new tasks, adapt to new systems, or take on completely different responsibilities. And in some cases, change leads to major restructuring, re-engineering, or downsizing, which can mean people losing their jobs. Even when change is necessary, it causes real hardship for the individuals affected. The text also introduces something called the personal compact. This is basically the unwritten agreement between employees and the organization, where both sides have certain expectations of each other, like job security, trust, and fair treatment. When the big changes happen, this compact can feel violated. For instance, if a company restructures suddenly and employees feel blindsided, they might lose trust or feel like the organization broke its promise. That's one of the main reasons why resistance to change is natural. It's emotional, not just logical. So, the big takeaway here is that leaders need to manage both phases of change, the exciting side and the painful side, with understanding and compassion. When leaders handle change poorly, it can destroy morale and trust, even if the new plan looks good on paper. But when they lead humanely, being transparent, empathetic, and supportive, they can help employees adjust and keep the organization strong. This means offering help to those who lose their jobs and paying attention to those who stay behind. The survivors also experience fear and uncertainty, so it's a leader's job to keep them motivated, reassure them, and rebuild trust. Here's something to think about. Chapter 15 describes change as having two phases. How would you describe those two sides? And which one do you think leaders tend to focus on first? The positive side encourages innovation, growth, and adaptation, helping the organization progress. The negative side brings stress, fear, and disruption, especially during major shifts. Leaders often focus on the positive for progress, while employees feel the painful side first. What do you all think? Why do people resist change even when it's supposed to help the organization? Resistance is natural because change disrupts people's sense of security. The personal compact, the unwritten trust between employees and the organization, can feel broken during major changes, causing uncertainty and pushback. Leaders should see resistance not as defiance, but as a human response to lost control. Now that we've seen both phases of change, let's look at how that emotional side connects to transformation itself, and how great leaders use emotion to inspire action rather than resistance. This next part dives into the emotional core of transformation, which is really the heart of what Chapter 15 is about. It reminds us that real, lasting change isn't just about strategies or plans, it's about people. The chapter emphasizes that organizations fail not because change is impossible, but because of a lack of effective change leadership. Leaders need to do more than just tell people what to do. They have to inspire them. That means engaging both the heart and the mind. Change based purely on logic or data rarely sticks, because people don't move on analysis alone. They move on emotion, purpose, and connection. So, the most successful leaders use emotional appeals through storytelling, symbolism, or humor to connect deeply with people and motivate them to embrace transformation. The chapter also talks about balancing vision and action. If a leader is all vision and no execution, they're just a dreamer. The ideas never become reality. But if they're all action and no vision, they're working blind, just moving without direction. The real power lies in combining both, turning dreams into strategies and action. And of course, not all change feels good. When change leads to painful outcomes like downsizing, leaders must handle those moments with humanity and compassion, helping displaced employees and emotionally supporting those who remain. That's what distinguishes a true change leader from just a manager. Leaders often see change as positive, but employees resist because it's disruptive. Can anyone tell me what techniques can leaders use to reduce resistance to a major change? Resistance happens when change disrupts trust and routine, breaking the personal compact between employees and the organization. Leaders can reduce it by communicating openly to ease fear, inspired buy-in through stories, involving employees in planning, and creating agency by explaining the need for change. Think about this for a second. Why is creativity so important, and what makes idea champions vital to innovation? Creativity drives innovation and helps organizations adapt. Idea champions believe in their ideas and push them forward, overcoming barriers and keeping innovation alive despite resistance. Now that we've explored how emotion drives transformation, let's look at how these ideas come to life through real examples and applications. This section illustrates that successful change depends not just on rational analysis, but on emotionally connecting with people, engaging both the heart and the mind. Great leaders know that facts alone rarely inspire change. Emotion drives belief and action, engaging the heart over the mind. At a cost-cutting company, a leader struggled to convince others of the need for change using charts and data. Then, an intern collected 424 different types of gloves purchased across the company's plants and piled them up in the executive boardroom. The executives were stunned. This emotional, visual display of waste created instant urgency, something raw numbers could never achieve. That story perfectly shows how emotional impact can create urgency, but emotion doesn't just drive urgency, it also defines the culture leaders build. Why are emotional appeals often more effective than rational analysis when creating agency for change? Because emotions drive action. Visuals and stories make people feel the need for change, which breaks resistance and inspires immediate commitments in ways logic alone cannot. This demonstrates that the first stage of major change, establishing a sense of urgency, works best when leaders connect emotionally, not just intellectually. The power of emotion helps people see and feel why transformation is essential. Leading with love versus faith. Let's look at another case, where a leader completely transformed a fearful workplace simply by leading with love instead of fear. Another example comes from Larry Walters at Quest Communications. The call center he inherited was ruled by fear and intimidation. Supervisors yelled, employees avoided taking risks, and morale was low. Walters changed everything by leading with love, genuine care, trust, and connection. Instead of demanding numbers, he asked personal questions like, "How was your son's little league game?" His compassion created a culture of trust and respect, where employees felt valued and began performing better because they wanted to, not because they had to. How does leading with love promote change more effectively than leading through fear? Love builds trust and motivation, while fear causes avoidance, silence, and low morale, which blocks growth and innovation. Leaders today must understand that genuine care inspires loyalty and creativity, making people more open to change. Failure to address the heart, the USS Florida case. Now, not all leaders get this right. Here's what happens when emotional intelligence is missing. In contrast, Commander Michael Afonso of the USS Florida demonstrated what happens when leadership ignores the emotional side. Although he achieved top certification grades, his harsh, bullying behavior damaged relationships and trust within his crew. People stopped communicating openly, and he was ultimately relieved of command. This shows that leadership is not just about competence or control. It's about creating an environment where people feel respected and safe enough to speak up, take risks, and work together. Now, next, we'll see how one leader mastered the balance between big picture vision and practical action. The story of Mike Eskew, CEO of UPS, illustrates a perfect balance between vision and action. Eskew inspired employees by reminding them that their work was noble, that they were making communities better. But he was also paid, but he also paid attention to practical details, like redesigning parking lots to improve operations. Eskew showed that effective leaders turn dreams into tangible results by balancing emotional inspiration with disciplined follow-through, ethical change, and humanity. And finally, one of the most powerful lessons, showing how true leadership shines even in moments of loss. William Peace, general manager of Westinghouse, faced the difficult task of laying off employees in the synthetic fuels division. Instead of sending a memo, he chose to meet with employees face to face to deliver the painful news personally. He allowed them to vent their frustration and anger directly to him. This act of compassion strengthened the morale of remaining employees, proving that even in moments of pain, ethical leadership leaves a lasting impact. I'll now hand you over to Maria.
Let's continue by looking at the impact and relevance of chapter 15, Leading Change. Chapter 15 is one of the most powerful chapters in the book because it highlights the urgent need for organizations to adapt and evolve in today's fast-changing world. It appears in part 5, The Leader as Social Architect, which focuses on how leaders build the culture, vision, and structure that help organizations succeed in uncertain times. The main idea is simple. Organizations that fail to change will eventually fail altogether.
The chapter explains that the modern environment is unpredictable, shaped by rapid technological advancement, globalization, and constant seismic shifts. To survive, leaders must define themselves as promoters of change, not maintainers of the status quo. It also explains that effective leadership today requires more than good management. It requires vision, emotional intelligence, and the ability to motivate others through both logic and inspiration. A major contribution of this chapter is that it provides systematic frameworks for transformation. For large scale change, it introduces an 8 stage model that begins with creating urgency and ends with embedding new practices into the culture. This reminds leaders that transformation takes time and effort at every stage. It also emphasizes everyday change. Leaders make small but consistent efforts like reframing problems positively, encouraging creative thinking, and building supportive relationships that slowly shift the organization into the right direction. Another key idea is the importance of innovation and creativity. The chapter encourages leaders to create environments where new ideas are welcomed, using tools like brainstorming and lateral thinking to inspire continuous improvement. The chapter highlights that successful change must reach both the mind and the heart. Resistance is natural, so leaders must connect emotionally with their people through storytelling, humor, and empathy to inspire commitment and trust. In summary, Chapter 15 shows that leading change is not just about strategy, it's about people, vision, and courage. True leaders guide others through uncertainty and create cultures that are open to growth and transformation. Now, consider these questions. What defines today's new reality for organizations, and why is adapting to it essential? Well, because the environment is unpredictable and fast changing, if organizations don't evolve, they fall behind. Another question to consider is, what does it mean for a leader to be a social architect? So, a social architect means building the systems, values, and culture that allow people to thrive during change. Moving on to the comparison of theories and viewpoints. Chapter 15 brings together many of the key leadership ideas from earlier chapters and shows how they all connect to leading change. It positions change leadership as the highest application of both personal and relationship building skills. The chapter compares traditional management with change leadership. Traditional management focuses on stability, control, and maintaining the status quo, while change leadership is about adaptability, courage, and inspiring people to grow in unpredictable conditions. It explains that change leaders operate outside of the old paradigm of predictability. In contrast to managers who work to keep things running smoothly, change leaders must navigate a chaotic and fast changing environment by encouraging flexibility and innovation. There's also a distinction between major change and everyday change. Major change refers to structured transformations that follow clear models like the 8 stage plan, which helps guide organizations through big transitions. Everyday change, on the other hand, is smaller and continuous. Things like reframing problems, modeling positive behavior, and encouraging creative thinking. These smaller actions help the organization stay adaptable over time. The chapter also contrasts rational versus emotional influence. While logic and analysis are needed to plan strategy, emotional connection is what actually drives transformation. Using storytelling, symbols, and emotional appeals help overcome resistance where facts alone fail. This connects to emotional intelligence, the ability to manage relationships and understand others' emotions, which was emphasized in chapter 5. Effective change leaders must also draw on core personal qualities from earlier lessons. They show courage from chapter 6, articulate strong values from chapter 14, and empower others to take responsibility from chapter 8. These traits help them promote adaptability and confidence within the team. Finally, the chapter stresses the role of innovation techniques. Brainstorming encourages free flowing ideas and lateral thinking challenges assumptions and sparks creative solutions. These approaches are key to solving modern problems that can't be fixed with old, rigid methods. Overall, Chapter 15 connects everything together, showing that to lead change, a person must combine rational thinking with emotional intelligence, creativity, and the courage to move beyond stability into growth. To finish, consider these discussion questions. What are the core assumptions of the old paradigm, and why do they conflict with today's reality? Well, the old paradigm values control, stability, and competition, but today's world is unpredictable, requiring flexibility, empowerment, and collaboration instead. Another question to consider is, how does traditional management differ from change leadership in terms of outcomes? Well, management keeps operations stable and efficient while leadership drives transformation and prepares the organization for the future. Moving on to change strategies. The Change Leaders Action Plan offers practical recommendations for improving management and driving successful organizational change. For large scale transformations, leaders should follow the 8-stage model, ensuring changes are embedded in the company's culture, leading to stronger, more adaptable organizations. For smaller managerial improvements, leaders can apply alliance building to gain support and reduce resistance, creating a more cooperative workplace. Encouraging innovation through brainstorming and lateral thinking helps businesses stay creative and competitive. Finally, by addressing the human side of change with empathy and support, leaders strengthen morale, trust, and long term productivity. Now, let's look at the conclusion of Chapter 15. In summary, Chapter 15 serves as a powerful reminder that in the modern world, change is essential rather than only a choice. Businesses that don't adapt will eventually fall behind, while those that welcome change and successfully manage it will prosper. Leading change requires guts, vision, and emotional intelligence in addition to sound management. Real change agents encourage advancement rather than only responding to difficulties. They inspire a sense of purpose that propels everyone towards a common goal and engage people's hearts in addition to their heads. This chapter also emphasizes that a leader's job is to empower, assist, and guide others through any change, no matter how big or small. It's about encouraging creativity, fostering trust, and converting uncertainty into opportunity. Overall, the most important lesson to be learned from chapter 15 is that leadership is about transformation, not simply preserving stability, but making significant advancements that support the development of individuals and organizations. I may now pass you on to Healy Ramuta to conclude this wonderful chapter.
These are just a few of our references. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation on Chapter 15, Leading Change. We hope this discussion helped you understand just how important effective leadership is in guiding organizations through transformation, especially in today's constantly changing world. Thank you all so much for your time and attention, and we hope you were able to take away something meaningful about what it truly means to be a change leader.